I'm Maverick Mattingly, a professional director and editor, and this is my review of Dehancer. Alright, so what is Dehancer? Now, according to their website, Dehancer is a film emulation software created by enthusiasts and scientists. 30 years of analog experience allowed them to develop an amazing toolset which gives your digital videos and photos a truly cinematic look, with over 60 photographic and movie films. You can apply things like film grain, halation, bloom, film breath, damage, and overscan. And it's compatible with editing softwares like Davinci Resolve, Final Cut Pro, Premiere Pro, After Effects. So basically it's a film emulation software, and what that means is that modern digital videos have a certain sharpness that film didn't have. And so what this program does is that it's an add-on to your editing software that makes your modern digital videos look more like film. And so first I'm going to walk you guys through my process on how I grade with Dehancer. Alright, so right here we have this shot of the beach filmed on my Sony FX30 in S-Log3. So the first step would be to create a node tree, really simple, just like this, with these nodes here, these 3 on top, 2 in the middle, and 3 on the bottom. And we're going to call this first one noise reduction. We're going to call this second one balance. Third one look. The middle 2 are for effects. This one is for contrast. This one is for our color space transform. Final node is where we put Dehancer. So the first step is to get our footage out of S-Log and into Rec 709. And the way you do that is with this thing called a color space transform. So now I'm going to drag this onto my color space transform node here. For the input color space, since it's my camera, I'm going to put Sony S-Gamut3.Cine. For my input gamma, I'm going to put Sony S-Log3. For my output color space, I'm going to put Rec 709. And for my output gamma, I'm going to put gamma 2.4. So now what this gives us here is just a base image with no color grade, just straight Rec 709 out of camera. And so the next step is to add the Dehancer effects. And so to do that, you scroll all the way down to this tab here, Film Emulation. You drag and drop Dehancer onto this node right here. And you can see you start off, the image doesn't look too good. And this is where I'm going to teach you how to add on all the effects properly. I'm going to take you down all these different tabs here and I'm going to explain what each of them do. So for input, since we did the color space transform with the separate node, we don't have to do it here with Dehancer. I personally choose to use a separate node because the one that's built into Dehancer doesn't work as well. So for input, as long as the source is Rec 709, you don't have to touch it. For film profiles, here you can see Dehancer has over 60 film profiles for film emulation, but the one that I always go to is CineStill 800T. Here in the Film Developer tab, you see if I enable this and I up the contrast, you can see the contrast of my image starts to go up. But I personally actually choose not to touch this tab because, as we saw in the start, I have my own separate node for color balance. This balance node is for things like highlights and exposure and shadows, and I choose to control that all separately outside of Dehancer so I can have a wider range of controls over my image. Alright, so the next tab is film compression. Now what this does is that when I enable it, film compression is going to take the highlights of my image and it's going to turn them down. And that's because film has a higher dynamic range than digital cameras. And what dynamic range means is that it's the amount of information that your camera can capture between the highlights of your image and the shadows of your image. And so what film compression does is that it takes your highlights down and it gives the look of more dynamic range. So here, when I enable this, you see my highlights go down and I can adjust the impact. So you see here how much the highlights are going down. I can adjust the white point, tonal range, and the color density. Now for my personal settings, I like to take the impact here somewhere about 60, between 60 and 70. And I like to take my white point and bring it to somewhere around 80 and 90. And up next we have the expand tab. Now what this does is that it changes the contrast of your image, but in a different way. When I change this black point slider here, you can see the shadows of my image actually go down. This is because when I move it to the right, it's taking the black points of my image and it's turning them down. And I don't like to touch this tab too much because I like to have my own dedicated contrast node. However, if I move the black point to the right a little bit, it'll add just a nice little bit of contrast here. And now print. This is another super important tab. Now you see at default that's set to linear. However, you have options like Cineon Film Log, Fujifilm Print, Kodak Print, and Endura Glossy Paper. However, my personal favorite is always Kodak 2383. And you can see right here, it gives us a nice contrasty, punchy film look. And this is your really cinematic, like Hollywood orange and teal kind of look. This is what Kodak 2383 will give you. And this is always my go-to film profile. Now, color head, you see when I enable this, I can adjust things like the tint of my image. So yellow versus blue, same thing with magenta and green. And you can adjust the tone of the shadows, the midtones, the highlights. Now film grain, this is another super important tab here in Dehancer. And what this does is that it just gives a nice layer of grain over your whole image and takes off a little bit of that digital sharpness. And so here you can see I have a bunch of different profiles, things like 8mm. Now the lower in numbers you go, the more grain there will be. And also 8mm ISO 50 will have less grain than 8mm ISO 500. Within each millimeter range, you have 3 different options for ISOs. And as you go up, each one will have more and more grain. So 500 will have a lot more grain than ISO 50. And that's it for film grain. Now onto the halation tab. Now halation is something that occurs in film when the bright points of your image meet the dark and contrasty points of your image. And halation is just this nice orange glow. Here, I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. Right there, you see around these waves right here, it gives a nice little orange glow. Now onto the bloom tab. What this does is that when I enable this, it gives a nice little soft glow. And bloom is different than halation because halation is only where the highlights of your image meet the slightly darker parts of your image, whereas bloom takes the highlights and just softens them out and it spreads out the light just a little bit more. Now onto the next tab, film damage. Now what this tab does is it emulates the natural damage that you would find in film. Because when film gets developed, it goes through this long process and that creates imperfections in the film. And what film damage does is that it attempts to recreate these small imperfections. And so you can see if I turn it way up here, it's way too much and it's a little bit distracting. I like to put mine on 65 just for a really subtle effect. Now onto the next effect, gate weave. So what gate weave does is it emulates the jitter effect of film. And this happens because when you shoot on a physical piece of film, you're shooting a roll and you're rolling the film through the camera and it creates a natural motion effect like that. Again, I like to leave this somewhere in the middle around 35 and you can put the effect a bit higher, something like 80. And the next effect you have is overscan. And what this does is that when I enable this, you can see it gives a nice letterboxing to the outside of your image to mimic the aspect ratio of film. And so you can see right here where I have Super 35, you can see the box shape that's around my image now. I can change it to something like Super 8, 16mm, Super 35, widescreen, and then Ultra Panavision, that's gonna be really wide. Almost there, the next effect is the vignette. And when I take down the exposure of the vignette, you can see it makes it a little bit darker and it draws my attention more towards the center. And so I always like to turn this on because it adds just a little more contrast and it draws your eyes toward the center of the picture a little more. So I can turn this on and just turn it down to something around -0.2. And the last 4 tabs are all technical things like monitor, output, LUT generator, and your options. All right, and now for my review of Dehancer. Now, they did send me this product to review and test, but all the opinions in this video are my own. So it's been about a month with Dehancer and I really enjoy it so far. I think it is a lot better than the built-in film look creator in Davinci Resolve that I'd been using since it came out prior to Dehancer. And the number one reason I like Dehancer over Davinci's built-in film look creator is just accuracy and variety. With Dehancer, there's over 60 different film profiles you can choose from, but within the built-in one in Davinci Resolve, there's only 5. And not only that, but it is way more accurate, in my opinion, than the film look creator, because with Dehancer, it is basically like scanning your image and adjusting the effects according to your image. And so what Dehancer does is that each frame it generates a brand new set of grain, whereas the built-in one in Davinci Resolve is basically just like one big overlay. It's just the same thing across the whole picture. The bloom effect in Davinci Resolve compared to the bloom effect in Dehancer, the one in Davinci Resolve tends to just blow your highlights around the center of the light source. The one in Dehancer just adds a nice soft glow to the outside. When learning this program, I found it pretty easy coming from a history of already knowing how to use Davinci's built-in filmlet creator because they're pretty similar. However, it did take some getting used to choose film profiles, and that can be overwhelming, but once you kind of go through all of them and get a feel for which film profiles that you like, it becomes really easy from there. And so those are some of the pros to Dehancer. And now on to some cons. Some things I didn't like about Dehancer was this first tab here, the input, where it has things like the source, the vendor, the camera, and the format, all which are not usually standard in something like a color space transform. The thing I didn't really like about Dehancer was how really heavy the base effects are, because when you first turn on Dehancer, it often just puts too much at the start, but obviously you can just turn them down or off and it'll give a more subtle look. Now, next, who do I think Dehancer is for? I think Dehancer is for an intermediate to advanced colorist who wants something better than the built-in filmlet creator in Davinci Resolve. I feel like Dehancer is a great tool for film emulation, and it's better than a lot of the other film emulation softwares out there. However, I wouldn't recommend it to beginners because the one that's built into Davinci Resolve will work fine. The price tag, coming in at $449 for a lifetime subscription, is a bit high for someone just entering color grading. In addition to their video editing software, Dehancer actually has a mobile app as well. For a quick review of the app, I would say overall it's pretty good. It has all the same built-in film profiles as the Dehancer add-on to Davinci Resolve. However, I would say that in the app you are a lot more limited with your abilities to change things like exposure and contrast. I wish that the app had basic photo editing things like being able to turn highlights down, and most of all, I wish they had some sort of masking tool so that I can mask certain parts of the image. But overall, besides those minor things, I feel like the Dehancer app is still a great option if you want to quickly color grade things from your phone. And yeah, that is my review of Dehancer. Again, thank you so much to the Dehancer team for sending me this product to review. Thank you so much everyone for watching. I would totally recommend Dehancer to anyone looking to level up their color grading game. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching.